Okay, so it's on. So good evening, everybody, and I want to apologize to those who are watching live or who will be watching a recording of this. That I did my best to try to find a different mechanism to replace the microphone that's built into the laptop, because a lot of people complained about that, and I thought I had it down, and I was here a half hour before I began trying it out, and it did not work. So I'm left to the laptop itself, and hopefully it'll work out. Our topic tonight is Purim, Bernie, and the Jews. And I say this a few times throughout, so if anybody comes into this YouTube recording a few minutes, but if anybody else is Jewish, I would have included them in this too. So what I want to talk about in terms of relating all of that is, how does our Jewish identity affect us, or does it influence us in our public role? In other words, can we separate out our Jewish identity, like how we are with other Jewish people, from how we are with when we're not with Jewish people? Are we the same person? Are we not the same person? Why is it if we're... That's what I want to talk about, and let me begin by sharing that today, Wednesday, March 4th, 2020, because this is archived or whatever, I never know when you're going to come back to this video. I was invited a couple weeks ago to give our state senator for this part of Olney is Craig Zucker, and he happened to be in shul last Shabbat too. And so his office invited me to give the information today. That's the second time I've done that, thanks to Senator Zucker. So it is a great honor. So part of me, when I got this invitation, said, what is a prayer doing in civil government? Shouldn't there be a separation of religion and state? And so, I'm not going to fight that battle on my own. Other people have fought that battle, and there are still prayers in state houses across the country. I believe so I haven't looked into this, but I assume that every state in our country has prayers to start the session, no matter how liberal the state or how conservative the state is. So, and our federal Congress opens with a prayer every day as well. So the goal that the guideline came from the chaplaincy office, and so there's the chaplain's office at the Maryland State House too. And so why is that? Okay, but the guidelines as to what kind of prayer to give, how to refer to God, so that everybody feels comfortable, that you are, in other words, for the Jews there, if you invoke Jesus's name, that would be an offensive prayer to Jews to hear that, because a Christian doesn't have to invoke Jesus's name in order to give a prayer, because you could just say God like everybody else. Okay, so I fit the guidelines, and I essentially just did the prayer for the country, but substituted Maryland for country sometimes, and so it worked. It worked. So last time I had to stay up on the stage next to the Senate president while the whole session went on. The protocol then was, once you're on, you can't get off. I said, so I asked, do I have to stay up? No, we changed the protocol. You can leave whenever you want. I won't be rude. So they did a bunch of introductions after my invocation to other groups that were there, and then I left. So that was good. But the idea was that what which leads to this conversation this evening, is about the role of Jews in government. And when we think about, I want to start first with the Purim story, the book of Esther, and then lead us on to on how to fight anti-Semitism. So this is his own words about what he feels about his Jewish background and how that influences him. So I want to talk about that too. So when we think of the book of Esther, what do we think about with Esther in terms of her relationship to her Jewish identity and how that impacted her role with King Ahasuerus? What comes to mind? Her role was to save the people. The people going to the king. But how did she even get there? Oh, so she entered the beauty pageant. She became the queen. And so you think? But she hid the fact she was Jewish. But she hid the. How did she hide the fact? So what was Esther's original name? Hadassah. Hence the women's organization. Yes, her name was Hadassah. She changed it to Esther. And okay, so we think that entering the beauty pageant is all part of this bigger plan in order to save the Jews. But in a beauty pageant happens in chapter 2 of the book. The Jews needing saving doesn't happen until chapter 3 when we're introduced to Haman. His wealth, and he's a ruler of the Persian Empire from Hodu until Kush, which translated usually is India to Ethiopia. 127 provinces. Okay, so huge empire. That's a whole other conversation about the book is all the exaggerations in the book. That perhaps it's not meant to be taken seriously at all. It's not meant to be a factual book. Okay, but that being said, chapter 1 all about the party King Ahasuerus has and demanding that his queen Vashti come to the party, right? She refuses. We think because she was asked to appear in a particular state of undress. But it's not exactly clear from the chapter itself. She refuses, so he gets rid of her and sends out a dictate to the entire empire. Women cannot refuse the order of their husbands. Okay? Which you see is another exaggeration in the book, right? What kind of marriage is it when a wife says, "Oh, yes, dear"? It's the husband that's, I'm sorry, you can say that I'm sexist. It's just a joke. It went in the theme of Purim. Chapter 2, then the king has a beauty pageant to find a new queen, because how else are you going to find a new queen other than have a beauty pageant? Another ridiculous thing. So there was a certain Jew in Shushan. There was a certain Jew in Shushan whose name was Mordecai, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives and had been carried away with Jehoniah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. Okay, so certain verses in the book of Esther. The book of Esther has a particular tune that's unique to the book of Esther. A couple of tunes are sung in the tune of the book of Lamentations, because the book of Lamentations in the Bible is sung on Tisha B'Av, the fast day that marks the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So there are a couple of verses that are sung that way to remind us of the exile and the relationship to the destruction of Jerusalem. There's one verse in chapter 1 that talks about all the utensils that King Ahasuerus had for his party. And that verse is done in the Lamentations tune because of the Midrash while he's using the vessels from the temple itself. So holy vessels in a very secular, profane kind of way. When Mordecai is described as among the captives, that's sung in the Lamentations tune as well. So this certain Jew, Mordecai, he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther. So nothing about it, just automatically her name is also Esther. Doesn't say why it's changed. His uncle's daughter, for she had, it doesn't say his niece, but it says his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maiden was of beautiful form and fair to look on. And when her father and mother were dead, Mordecai took her for his own daughter. Okay, so Mordecai adopts Esther as his niece. Why is her name changed? Don't know, but Esther's a nice Persian name because it's like it would be named for girls, Christian girls to have. Esther is a good name for Persian girls to have for Ishtar, the goddess of Babylonia or Persia. So Esther is a Persian pagan name. Hadassah is related to the myrtle branches that you use in the lulav, and etrog, the 4 species that we gather together on Sukkot. So Hadassah is a good Jewish name. It's indigenous to the land of Israel. So she gives up Hadassah for Esther. We don't know why. Okay, and then it came to pass when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan, to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was taken into the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. So he enters Esther into this beauty pageant. It doesn't say why. It's not to say why. It's, okay, so the Midrash would say, so Julian suggests, and maybe Mordecai suggesting something's up, but there's nothing up with the Jews yet. There's nothing up with the Jews yet. I just want to point this out. And then, so she enters. Obviously, she finds favor in the eyes of the king and is chosen as the queen. Okay, so Mordecai's plan to enter her into the pageant bears out. Why he enters her, we don't know. And then Mordecai overhears a plot of assassination attempt of King Ahasuerus. Mordecai saves the day. It's recorded in the journal, and then nothing happens to Mordecai until the end of the book when King Ahasuerus can't sleep one night. That's chapter 6. And reads the journal. Oh, whatever happened to Mordecai? So how come we didn't honor him? Okay, it's only chapter 3 that Haman, we're introduced to him, and he wants everybody to bow down to him, and decides to kill the Jews. And then, oh, by the way, Esther conveniently is in a good place to be able to help out. So my point is that what we think that Esther, the whole thing is part of Mordecai's plan to save the Jews from the beginning, but there wasn't anything to save at the very beginning. So, yes.
You didn't have to worry about that, but life is difficult. And changing your name means that life will be a little bit easier. And it may not be there, but.
Okay, so Barbara is bringing up an interesting point about her changing her name. We're not told why she names Vayehi Omein et Hadassah he Esther. He was the guardian of Hadassah, who is Esther. Okay, we just don't. So Barbara, all I'm saying, Barbara, is we look back on why Jews have non-Jewish sounding names, right? So in other words, though it seems silly to us, to our ears now, many Jews, when they came to America, were named Irving or Sadie, thinking that was a good American name. Okay, really? And now, how many Jews have an Uncle Irving or an Aunt Sadie? Right, so that seems like a Jewish name, but it really was thought to be an American name. Okay, so we have a so-called Hebrew name of. You go into a Hebrew name dictionary. Alexander, written in Hebrew letters, is. So how is that? Alexander the Great. Obviously, that's who that name is. There are rabbis in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, rabbis themselves who have Greek and Latin sounding names, who don't change them into Hebrew names because they're being quoted in the Mishnah or the Gemara, They just keep their names. And throughout history, rabbis, Jews have the names that are part of the country that they live. Now, of course, Moses Maimonides and Moses Nachmanides and Rashi, they all have Hebrew names, but the other Jews who they
Crypto Jews would even name their children Jesus.
Right. That's right. Yes. Okay, so Chet's bringing up another aspect to this. So it's one thing to try to be part of the society, to stay under the radar. It's another thing in Christian Spain under the Inquisition to not only be under the radar, but to pretend to be Christian, to go through the motions and say you're Christian, but then hide the fact that you're still Jewish in your home. So yes, so even more so. So Jews would never take the name Jesus or Mary. Now, there are Jews with the name Mary today, but in America, but you would not have it in medieval Christian Europe. Jews would not do that. But why did Hadassah change her name? The book leaves that blank for us to then hark back from our perspective from 2,000 years. Well, the book of Esther supposedly around 500, 400 BCE. So 2,500, 2,400 years ago, to put our history, all that history back onto. So all I can say is we don't know why she changed her name. But the point is that she was able to achieve the greatest accomplishment of a Jew, to be queen of the Persian Empire. That's what we know from the book, right? So Mordecai implores her, hey, the Jews are in trouble. We need your help. So she doesn't say no. She says, okay, I need the Jews to pray for me. Where did she get that from? We don't know anything about praying for anybody in the Bible before that. Moses prays for his sister Miriam's health in 6 words, but we don't know of anybody else praying for any. We know of Hannah praying, going to the Mishkan in Shiloh to pray for a son, a son, but we don't know the words. Yes, we do. That they're later on. So we have the words of Hannah in the Haftarah, first day of Rosh Hashanah. We have the words of Moses' prayer for his sister Miriam, and we have, which by the way, the name Mary comes from Miriam, and we have Moses imploring God on behalf of forgiving the people. Okay, so there are certain examples, okay, but it's just not a regular example. The regular kind of official kind of worship would be to go to the temple in Jerusalem. We don't know what happens after the destruction of the first temple and exile to Babylonia, then to Persia, what the Jews did. So she asked for them to pray and fast for 3 days, which is why we have the one fast day right before the day of Purim. And then she says, I'll go in and implore the king to see what I can do. And she saves the day. Okay, so here, Esther clearly has no problem connecting to her Jewish identity and using that in order to save the Jews of Persia. Yes, Saul. And that's
right.
Yes.
She couldn't enter the contest because her name was Hadassah. They wouldn't let any Jews in.
So that's possible. Saul's suggesting that in order to enter the contest, she needed to have a Persian-sounding name. The name is already Esther before she enters the contest. And I would also suggest that King Ahasuerus invited beautiful women from across the empire. So if Ethiopian women would not have Persian names, and whatever Indian women would not have Persian names either. So wouldn't necessarily think that you'd have to change your name to a Persian name in order to be queen if you're being invited from all across the empire to come, right? I don't think everybody would change their name in order to enter the contest. But
You know, today, there's a lot of people have an American name and a Hebrew.
yes,
So why can't she have the same thing?
so why couldn't she have gone by both names? Because the only time she's referred to Hadassah is that verse when Mordecai. We're told that Mordecai has a niece named Hadassah who is Esther, and the rest of the book she's Esther. Never referred to as Hadassah again. I'm just saying, Barbara. So I don't want to spend too much time on all the details of the book. I'm just suggesting the fact that she went by Esther the rest of the time. Even Mordecai, when Mordecai goes to her, he doesn't say Hadassah, or the narrator doesn't change her name to Hadassah when the two of them are having a conversation. She's still Esther. Susan.
When she is saving, and when she does the saving,
Yes.
her Jewishness is not known.
Well, she tells Ahasuerus a few sentences into her request that she is Jewish.
Okay, all right.
That's chapter 5. Chapter 5. She invites them to a party, right? She invites Ahasuerus and Haman to a party, and then at the party, somebody's going to be killing, and they're my people, right? And who's the person killing my people? It's that man, Haman. Hang him. That all happens, chapter 5.
So she has set the scene, the plot has been conceived
Yes,
without it being known.
that's right.
Right.
That's right. There are 2 chapters where there's a plot and people are, it's counting down to the 14th of Adar, or 13th of Adar, when the Jews are going to be killed. What we're going to do? And Esther is not doing anything until Mordecai implores her to do something.
So this will be tangential, so I'll just note it, but
Yeah.
I don't want it to digress.
Yeah, because I want to get to burning.
There's a whole Kabbalistic spin on this tale.
Yes.
That has to do also with Esther, the name Esther is very close to Nishtar, which is hidden.
Nistar. Esther. Right. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes.
And so that in terms of one of the themes of the whole chapter
Yeah.
about what is hidden
Uh-huh.
and the whole.
Okay, that's good. That's
So I
good.
just wanted to-
Absolutely. Right. So the fact that it's in the Bible means that it has to be taken as seriously as the most theologically important books of the Bible. Even though the story itself is a ridiculous comedy exaggeration from the details itself. The mystics, rabbis do not see it as ridiculous. They see it as absolutely serious. And so Esther, by making it into a Hebrew word, if you didn't have the vowels printed there, Aleph, Samach, Taf, Resh would be Asater, I will hide. Nistar is, it is hidden. So it's the same. Samach, Taf, Resh is a Hebrew root. But the word, her name is vocalized, the vowels are there as Esther. Has nothing then to do with that root. But for the mystics and the rabbis before them, no, it's in the Bible, therefore it's Hebrew. All these, and the longest word in the Bible is in the book of Esther, and it's a Persian word, Ahashdar Panim, or one of those, the messengers who run with the, I'm not sure, it might have been in your chapter 9. You and your cousins all read chapter 9. One of them had that word. That's a tongue twister, and it's yeah. So anyway, so there's a Persian word. I don't know what the mystics and the rabbis do with that word. But so yes, absolutely. Yes. Right.
The masks and all
Yes.
of that.
Yes.
All of that kind of stuff, and that may go into, I don't know.
Right. Okay, so
This may.
I didn't want to go the mystic route. No, I'm just going and how did her Jewish identity, how did she, it wasn't even Jewish. Well, yeah, he's called it Ish Yehudi, but that Is that a Jewish man? Well, yes, it is a Jewish man because he's from the tribe of Benjamin. So it's the first time we're called Jews. Okay, so we're not called. Yehudi could have been used before, but it meant you're from the tribe of Judah. So here, Mordechai is from the tribe of Benjamin, and he's called an Ish Yehudi. So how do Jewish people, like Esther, respond to their Judaism? All I'm saying, it's kind of cryptic at the beginning, why she has the Persian name, and she hides her Jewish identity until the very last minute when there's no choice other than if I don't act, then the Jews are going to be killed. Okay, so all of that as an introduction to how Jewish candidates have responded to being Jewish and having to answer to critics, pundits, journalists who are asking the question, is your Jewish identity going to affect you being president? Like 50, 60 years ago when people asked John F. Kennedy if his Catholic religion and his Catholic faith is going to affect him. Like, is he going to be loyal to the Pope or loyal to the Constitution kind of thing? So similar questions are asked about Jewish candidates. I just want you to hear what Bernie Sanders had to say a year after the events at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. So this article was published in a magazine called Jewish Currents, and it's titled How to Fight Anti-Semitism. It was published November 11th, and he says, the threat of anti-Semitism is not some abstract idea to me. It's very personal. It destroyed a large part of my family. I'm not someone who spends a lot of time talking about my personal background because I believe political leaders should focus their attention on a vision and agenda for others rather than themselves. But I also appreciate that it's important to talk about how our backgrounds have informed our ideas, our principles, and our values. Okay, so I just want to make sure that's clear, right? So it's clear that he has some Jewish values that he has been brought up with, but I appreciate that it's important to talk about how our backgrounds have informed our ideas, our principles, and our values. Okay, he says in the next paragraph, I am a proud Jewish American. My father emigrated from Poland to the United States in 1921 at the age of 17 to escape the poverty and widespread anti-Semitism of his home country. Those in his family who remained in Poland after Hitler came to power were murdered by the Nazis. I know very well where white supremacist politics leads and what can happen when people do not speak up against it. Okay, so the one main thing he's talking about in this article is this Jewish identity related to standing up against anti-Semitism. That's okay. And so he's saying, obviously, I have personal experience with this. I know that my family, so my immediate family was saved, but my extended family perished in the Holocaust. Okay. This wave of violence is so he then goes on to bring the statistics about how there's a rising wave of anti-Semitism in the country. This wave of violence is the result of dangerous political ideology that targets Jews and anyone who does not fit a narrow vision of a whites-only America. We have to be clear that while anti-Semitism is a threat to Jews everywhere, it's also a threat to democratic governance itself. Okay, so saying that personally, anti-Semitism is an affront to me personally as a Jew, but because I'm an American, it's an affront to all of us as Americans. Values that I've been brought up with shape who I am today, but I'm also an American, and there are American values too. So then he goes on to explain how this relates to being such a progressive, politically progressive person. And so he says this, opposing anti-Semitism is a core value of progressivism. Okay, let me just say that again. Opposing anti-Semitism is a core value of progressivism. A lot of people would disagree with that because a lot of people think that many progressives are anti-Semites. But he's arguing against that. So it's very troubling to me that we are also seeing accusations of anti-Semitism used as a cynical political weapon against progressives. One of the most dangerous things Trump has done is to divide Americans by using false allegations of anti-Semitism, mostly regarding the U.S.-Israel relationship. We should be very clear that it is not anti-Semitic to criticize the policies of the Israeli government. Okay, so he's distancing himself from the BDS movement. The BDS, it goes on about that. The BDS boycott, divestment, sanctions movement is usually associated with left-wing progressive people who see Israel as an apartheid state and sees it as worthy of, that Israel is worthy of being boycotted, divested from, and having sanctions too because of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. But they go on, many in the BDS movement go on and not just spew anti-Israel statements, but often anti-Semitic statements too. So he's trying to walk this fine line between being anti-Semitic versus just being anti-Israel, and specifically the policies of the Israeli government, right? So we should be very clear that it is not anti-Semitic to criticize the policies of the Israeli government. Then he says, I have a connection to Israel going back many years. In 1963, I lived on a kibbutz near Haifa. It was there that I saw and experienced for myself many of the progressive values upon which Israel was founded. I think it's very important for everyone, but particularly for progressives, to acknowledge the enormous achievement of establishing a democratic homeland for the Jewish people after centuries of displacement and persecution. So now he is writing for a Jewish publication. And I'm not sure how often he says this out loud, but he says the enormous achievement, it's important for everyone to acknowledge the enormous achievement of establishing a democratic homeland for the Jewish people after centuries of displacement and persecution. Okay, so he's connecting to his Jewish values, his Jewish history. There's a right for the state of Israel to exist as a homeland, as a democratic homeland for the Jewish people. Okay, and then he says, we must also be honest about this. The founding of Israel is understood by another people in the land of Palestine as the cause of their painful displacement. Okay, so he goes on to being, sounds like a proud Jew. Okay, and so criticizing the Israeli government. There are a lot of Jews across the political spectrum who criticize the Israeli government. Okay, so it's one thing not being a citizen of Israel to criticize the Israeli government. There are many Israelis who criticize the Israeli government who are Jewish. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with that. But he uses this, he calls the land, not the land of Israel, but the land of Palestine, in order to introduce that there are Palestinians too. So that is interesting that he did that. And just as Palestinians should recognize the just claims of Israeli Jews, supporters of Israel must understand why Palestinians view Israel's creation as they do. Acknowledging these realities does not delegitimize Israel any more than acknowledging the sober facts of America's own founding delegitimizes the United States. It's a necessary step of truth and reconciliation in order to address the inequalities that continue to exist in our respective societies. So I know that this sounds like it's going to now be an examination of Bernie Sanders' policies, and I don't want to do that. Okay, so I promised at the beginning I'm going to say a lot, and this is now only the second time I'm saying this. This is not an endorsement or a rejection of Bernie Sanders as a political candidate. Okay, so it's not about that. I only want to understand this in light of his Jewish identity. So, the question, which I didn't really get to with Esther, is what do we suppose the Jewish values that Esther might have had? What are the Jewish values that Bernie Sanders might have been brought up with? And he talks about he's raised with Jewish values that could have led him to adopt progressive ideas, and such progressive ideas, which I would argue are Jewish ideas, not about Israel. I'm talking about other ideas like health care for all. I would say that's a Jewish idea. We need to take care of everybody in society. The Torah teaches us that. Torah teaches that we have to take care of the poor and the disadvantaged. We have to take care of the poor and the disadvantaged in the community, right? So we have to but the rabbis say, you give up to 20% of your property in charity every year, because if you give more than 20% of what you have, you'll be poor too. So you give up to 20% of your property to help other people. So that's a Jewish value based on the Torah, to help other people. And healthcare is one of the ways to help other people. Make sure that people are educated, right? So the Torah talks to teach your children. It's arguing through college. You can argue as a Jewish value, right? And climate change and his proposal of the supporting the Green New Deal, you would argue as a Jewish value that we should be supporters. As Jews, we need to ensure that the world we have to be stewards of the earth, and that's chapter 1 of Genesis. We were created in order to not only to have dominion over creation, but to take care of creation. Okay, so it is a Jewish value to have dominion over creation, but to take care of creation. Okay, so it is a Jewish value to take care of the earth. So all these so-called progressive values are Jewish values. The only question that we might have Jewishly to Bernie Sanders would be his relationship to Israel. And so, and I think that Bernie is just one example of Jews in America today, which the Jewish community in America is clearly not united, despite the AIPAC conference that just concluded yesterday, which 18,000 Jews came. No, 18,000 people. I don't know. Most of them are Jewish, but there's a sizable amount of non-Jews who go and attend the AIPAC conference. So let's say 15,000 of the 18,000 are Jewish. That's a sizable amount who are supporting AIPAC. And so, but that's only a drop in the bucket of the 6 or 7 million Jews who live in America, who have very different opinions about what it means to support Israel. So I'm just any thoughts about Bernie just from the Jewish value perspective of guiding him? I don't want comments about him as a candidate. I just want him as a Jew expressing Jewish values in his candidacy. Gabe.
I read an interview with him recently, and he was talking about his background.
Yes.
And he pointed to 2 specific things. One was growing up Jewish,
right,
in Brooklyn, and seeing the tattoos, everyone's wrists.
Right.
And the second was growing up without money.
Right.
And I thought it was very interesting to juxtapose the 2 things.
Right. So many Jews, immigrant Jews, were started with nothing and were certainly extremely poor in Brooklyn and other metropolitan areas that they came to, and help eradicate that from society and ensure that other people wouldn't have to live through what he, Bernie, and other people like him had to live through. And yes, so certainly poverty is there, and then if you're growing up with people who are survivors, you see that on the list. You might not be aware of it until you're a little bit older, but yeah, so many people. It's interesting. There are many classes I take through the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. The classes I like the most are is a poetry class by this woman, Rachel Korazin, who herself is a daughter of survivors of the Holocaust, a Hungarian Jew. So I've read a lot of poetry and some short stories about Israel in the 1950s, as people are coming into Israel in droves, not just from Arab countries, but also from Europe, that a standard part of the news every day was a list of kind of like reading the classifieds out loud on the news. I am Yankel Mendelovich, and I'm here in Israel, and I'm looking for my relatives. And there's a whole list of names like that would be read off. I'm here, I'm alive. Are any of my relatives here in Israel? I'm looking for you. And then you go through that. And there are many Israelis today who are brought up remembering the news and hearing that over and over, like Bernie recounting what you're saying, Gabe, of seeing people with the tattoos on their arms. So it becomes part of your identity. Like, wow, look at our history where our people were murdered by the Nazis. We've survived. What are we going to do about that? Susan, did you have it?
Yeah, I was thinking about, in terms of Jewish values and what you said about poverty, about a piece of the social justice being equated with their their socioeconomic status, huge inequality of that whole equation there, and that there's just something inherently, aren't all of us worthy of a good education, a place to live,
right?
A health care, because all of us together share our humanity and are responsible for each other.
Right. Just look at how many Jews throughout the history of this country have been involved in politics because they've seen that their Jewish values have driven them to get involved in this way. And what the immigrant experience has done. So American endeavor in the fight, equivalent today in terms of the amount of money he has. So so it's not just financial contribution to society, philanthropic contribution, but it's also actively involved in jobs or in volunteer efforts, or social action endeavors through the particular career that one has. It's just incredible how in America we've taken advantage of the fact that we are free and equal citizens of the country, and we've gone to the high level except for the presidency. But we had a vice presidential candidate a number of years ago. But any other thoughts or comments about this? So I just thought it was interesting in this season of Purim to try to understand Esther's role in the story of Purim in this different way. In other words, understanding that Esther herself was assimilated before she saved the Jews. We're left wondering what is her Jewish background, what kind of guardian her uncle Mordecai was, what did she learn about her Jewish ancestry from Mordecai or from her parents who go unnamed in the story. But whatever it was enabled her to rise above, to connect to being Jewish, to use that to her advantage to save the Jews. And what we have done as Jews today, how our values help us and motivate us to become to become better people too. So I just thought it would be interesting to highlight these ideas and hopefully not be political and not be anti-Bernie or pro-Bernie, but just to put that in this Jewish perspective that that we should be proud that there were two Jewish candidates. Now there's still just one Jewish candidate running for president. Proud, no matter whether we like him or not. Proud of the fact that we are able, and that he's not even that his Jewishness isn't coming out. Like it's not a focus of anybody who is pro-Bernie or anti-Bernie, writing on whether it's CNN or Fox. Nobody's focusing on the Jewish part of him. They're focusing on his platform. Okay, that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. Sorry.
So this is the vote.
Yeah. Okay.
It seems since the beginning of time that if somebody wanted to rise to the top, the Jewish person, they would try to become assimilated.
Right.
They would change their name.
Yes.
And they would change their occupation and try to get hired. You know, Bernie Sanders is not a Jewish name. He probably changed his last name.
But maybe so. Saul suggested maybe the people have changed their name in order to be able to achieve success, and it's possible that his last name was changed. I don't know. He doesn't say, but he didn't change his name. His parents might have changed his name. I think he was. You know, you go on Wikipedia. I don't. It's not a Polish name. You're right, but it's possible that his father changed the name when he came to America, and not Bernie himself. But yeah. Look at all the actors. Kirk Douglas, whose name was a very, very Yiddish name.
Well, my name is Saul Cohen.
I'm not a Cohen.
Business world, I was working.
Right.
Like, people had preconceived notions
Yes.
about me when I was in media. And they
Right.
would say sometimes good things and sometimes
Right.
bad. So, if he becomes a nominee,
Yes.
I think that he will be questioned.
Oh, yes. That,
Especially by the opposition. Because
Right.
they'll want to influence a lot of votes
Yes.
against him.
yes.
No matter what his stand is, whether it's a Jewish stand or not.
So I agree. I think so. The sole nominee representing the Democratic Party in the presidential election in November, that they're leading up to that, there could be a lot more attention.
Right, and I think
on-
that, Joe Lieberman had more attention, not because he was running for vice president, even before that, because he walked to shul.
Yes.
And he acted more like a Jew.
Right. Well, okay. So that's interesting to compare Joe Lieberman, who's an Orthodox Jew, or at least goes to an Orthodox synagogue, and his wife's name is Hadassah. That's right. So people knew he walked from Capitol Hill to Kesher, Israel, in Georgetown to go to shul, and keeps kosher, but he never wore a kippah in public, in the Senate or in speaking or anything like that. But people knew that he was an observant Jew. Bernie is not an observant Jew. So, but the values still drive both of them. The Jewish values. So Joe himself got into. However, why anybody goes into public service, you would think, is to make a difference. So somehow social justice values drive you, but with Joe Lieberman, it's also observance. Jewish observance drove him too. The Jewish observance is meaningless, supposedly, to Bernie. Yeah. So was there something else?
No, I just said,
Okay, Lisa. Okay.
The first thing that was mentioned.
Right.
Jewish candidate, vice president.
Right.
All the things that made him a Jew.
Right.
Including like he wouldn't just speak certain things on Shabbos.
Right.
But what you just said about, and so in the psyche of America.
Yeah.
the person
Right, because he was the first one.
Right, but it was also because it was observant that he
Yes.
pointed to all these things that made him Jewish.
Right.
And with Bernie,
Yes.
They're guided by the same principles.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so the principles are there. It's just, I think that it's the push come to shove with Bernie, just how it seems. Again, it's not, it doesn't mean to be a criticism of him. It's just that he doesn't feel it necessary to have to publicize all the time that he's Jewish, because as all of us as Jews should understand, and all American citizens should understand, we're American first. And that we shouldn't be looked to and or judged by the color of our skin or by the religion or anything else that might be part of our identity. Well, if we're doing something American, we're doing something American. And that's what Bernie is trying to, I think, trying to get across. With Joe Lieberman, before that, I remember in the 70s, because I'm from Pennsylvania, there was a Jewish governor of Pennsylvania, Schaff, right, who had changed his name from Shapiro, I think. And he was a presidential candidate once or twice in 68 or 72. I remember this. And being as young as I was back then, I do remember that. And I don't remember anything that, I guess, because he wasn't a serious candidate. He never got the votes. But I don't think anything was ever mentioned about him being Jewish. But there have been, Jewish senators before, Jewish congressmen before, Jewish governors, mayors, etc. And so the idea is that whether you're observant or not, you're an American citizen, and you can rise in the highest echelons of government. Check.
Part I wanted to make is that we Jews have been a very diverse group of people.
Right.
Going all the way back to
right.
Moses.
Well, I say the issue though, the diversity, is that it's only since the founding of America and subsequently the French Revolution, so almost happening at the same time in Europe, that before that time, Jews were not diverse because we were forced to live together in a ghetto. Or if it's not a ghetto, in a particular area of the city or the country. So our diversity, we weren't allowed to be diverse. We had to live together, and because we're forced to live together, we followed the same practice. That we couldn't ever dream about leaving the ghetto and doing something else. There was never a dream like that. So I'd only just argue historically that the dreams that we have today as Americans, as Jewish Americans, and even Jews in Europe, that's only been for the past 250 years. And so that seems like a long time, but in the scheme of 4,000 years of Jewish history, it's a drop in the bucket. So, and for many of us who are trained in Jewish history and know all the travails of Jewish history, you're looking over your shoulder still today. And especially with the rise of anti-Semitism, it's making more of us look over our shoulder and wonder how safe we really are. But until a few years ago, we were taking for granted that we have the right to go everywhere, do everything, and be involved in everything, despite experiencing the comments at work. But everybody gets, right? Black people get comments at work, Polish people get, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Women have comments at work. So, okay, so Jews have comments at work too. But despite that, we're able to achieve greatness. But the rabbis, right, that's true. We have different kinds of comments we have to deal with, but not anti-Semitic comments. So, yeah. Yeah. So again, just to that point about that we shouldn't take for granted. Well, the rise of anti-Semitism today shows us that we can never take for granted, even in the best country in the world. And I'm saying that as an American and as a Jew, the best country in the history of Judaism. the best country for the treatment of Jews in the world, we still can't take for granted our place here. Any other thoughts or comments? Yeah, Gabe.
Kind of related to that,
Yeah.
I'm sort of amazed that the connection between Bernie's so-called socialism, it's not true socialism.
Right. Yeah.
And Judaism hasn't been made.
Right. You know, they're living on the kibbutz. Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. So Gabe's pointing out why isn't there more of a connection being made between Bernie's socialist agenda? No, but so we could candidacy, and I don't want it, but just he did spend some time in another country known for social, right? So I'm not going to mention that, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. So yeah, I don't know how much the kibbutz really influenced him. There are a lot of people at that time, a lot of Jews at that time, from very secular backgrounds who had spent time in Israel. So, and that was just like a rite of passage for lots of Jews in America to spend some time in Israel. So the fact that he did that and how much influence that really had on it is possible. I mean, he says it in the article, but is he saying it because it's a Jewish publication? He thought, oh, I can put that in there too to get my Jewish cred. I don't know. I really don't know how much it has an influence on him. And so. Yeah, but again, some principles of socialism are about ensuring that everyone in society is taken care of. And like I'm saying, that is a Jewish ideal. Now, as a Jew, I am in favor of healthcare for all. Personally, I think it is a Jewish right for and value that everybody has a right to healthcare, everybody has a right to education, everybody has a right to be taken care of. People shouldn't be poor in society. We need to provide for everybody so that everybody can know that they have a place to live, food on the table, and nothing to worry about. I firmly believe that that's our responsibility to do that. But I also believe that people have the right to become billionaires. Okay, so I am a capitalist in that way. I have decided. Obviously, I decided not to be a billionaire and pursue that. Yeah. So, but I do think so. So, I even more so if you're a billionaire, a Jewish billionaire, you have the responsibility to share that wealth with other people. Okay, so yeah, so if that's socialism, I'm not sure. Is it definitely socialism? I really don't know.
It's not like we learned the parts.
Yes, parts I feel for other people, for the poor, right?
And if you let people have
Right, to not charge overwhelming interest and don't take literally the shirt off of someone's back as collateral. Right, but how it's put into practice today, right? So in other words, there's some who suggest that people should take care of themselves and leave it to other philanthropic organizations to take care of people. I don't believe that. I think the role of government is to take care of people because the Torah says that. I mean, we as a society need to take care of other people, and we do that as a society through government. That's the vehicle to do that. So that's my Jewish perspective, and if it's political, so be it. But so I'm not saying which party to vote for. I'm just saying that the Torah mandates this. My Jewish education teaches me this. This is how we are supposed to be a responsible society. David.
Yeah, you think that the government's supposed to take care of people is a modern thought.
That's a modern thought. The government's supposed to take care of people. Yeah, well, modern in terms of the history of America, yes. Okay, right, but I would think that. Okay, so I'm not a social historian, so I don't know how far back it goes. Right, FDR with the New Deal. Right, he created Social Security, right?
Originally, the idea was private philanthropical, the church
Right.
would take care
No, that's true. That's true. And I guess in Europe, that was like that as well. So I guess it's after World War II that things changed. But again, I'm not a social historian, and please don't, anybody watching this, don't take that as fact, what I just said. I really don't know. But yes, it's right. But
What we're just done is define this as basically Jewish value.
it's exactly right. We have to find a Jewish value that, yes, and so that's what I would suggest, that when, in every presidential election, I think it's our responsibility to find a candidate that represents the values that we hold dear. And that in the previous election and other elections, certain Jews voted for a candidate solely based on their position on Israel. And that we are not a one issue, we as Jews are not a one issue people. Israel, sure, it's important to have a strong relationship and ensure that the candidate supports values too. So we're not a one issue, we shouldn't be a one issue people. So however you yourselves define your values and your social justice values, that's the candidate that you should be voting for. The one candidate who matches as many, who checks off as many of the boxes as possible for the values that you hold dear and the values you think that that candidate is going to represent. Have a good evening.
Very nice.
Okay.